Hello? Hello? No, I can't. No, I can't hear anything. Hello? Can't hear you. 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing.
Can you hear me? No, I can see you. I can't hear you.
No, sorry. Can't hear a thing.
Oh, is it me? Have you tried unplugging it?
Voice Acting Unplugged.
Hello, and welcome to Voice Acting Unplugged, the podcast where we try and find out exactly what's happening in the whole voiceover industry and see what's coming next so we can adapt, thrive and survive. And I'm joined by my trusty sidekick, Margaret Ashley.
Hello! And we've got a very special guest today, Ana Clements, who is an audiobook narrator and voiceover. And she's bilingual in Spanish and English. And I'm going to do my TV report a bit now. I'm going to read off my phone to tell you all about Ana. She's an audiobook narrator and works full-time as a voice actor. And she's worked with companies such as Hatchet Audio, Blackstone, Harper Audio, Penguin Random House, Audible, Dreamscape, and other publishers and independent authors in Europe, the US and the UK. She's the founder of Audiobooks Club on Clubhouse, the weekly host of Wednesday's Narrator Assemble, and she's an audiobook speaker and coach. She works with writers groups introducing audio with individual authors to see if audiobooks are a good fit for them, and with narrators to help them move forward in their career. She works mainly in historical fiction, psychological thriller and non-fiction, and sometimes in romance, but with a pseudonym. She's been a speaker and coach at loads of conferences in America mainly, and we're now going to ask her all sorts of questions about audiobooks. Hello, Ana.
Hello, thank you very much.
We've almost run out of time with all of that. That's extraordinary stuff. Hi, Ana. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming. And
Thank you.
tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into voicing in the first place?
Short story. I always tell the same story. At 19, I told my parents I wanted to be a singer, that I wanted to earn my living with my voice, not to be a famous pop star, but to spend my days using my voice. And they said, "Oh, you have to be really good to do that." So
That's nice.
I studied economics at university, and I got into finance, and I moved to the country, had a family and children, and in my midlife went, this isn't how this was supposed to turn out. I was supposed to do more, be more. And so I did. I took 5 years of classical singing, got into musical theatre, bought a microphone, got invested in acoustics and sound engineering, and discovered audiobooks, and started off in corporate narration, e-learning, video games, and found my passion, and the rest is history, as they say.
Audiobooks is a massive genre. It's not just a narrator gets a book and reads it and then it's published. There's a whole genre within genres within audiobooks, isn't there? There's fact, there's fiction, and then within that there's thrillers, there's romance, there's children's. It's just enormous. Can you talk us through the whole process of how you find a book you want to narrate, or how you are cast as a narrator, what you have to do within that, how you have to prepare, explain all the different terminology that nobody knows about and haven't heard of, and just to go, what? It's just a book.
How long have you got, Margaret?
We've got about half an hour.
So there's various places you go to find work. So there is the big five publishing houses, the Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster's of this world. Then the production houses who undertake as a middleman the work of working with the publishing houses to produce their audiobooks if it's too many for them to undertake themselves. And then they also work with independent authors. And then there are the independent authors themselves who are happy to produce the book on their own. There are different contracts. You can work royalty share or per finished hour. So royalty share allows you to get some money up front to pay for the production, the editing and mastering, but not your full rate, because you are supposedly willing to put that off in exchange for 7 years of royalties. So you'll get 20% of the royalties on the sales of the book. So it then behoves you to help promote the book, talk about the book, go on podcasts, discuss the fact that you're a narrator, etc., etc. And so or you can have the independent author or the publishing houses pay you outright at a basic rate per finished hour. So regardless of how long it takes you to narrate the book, you will be paid for the finished time of the book. And on average, it takes 2 to 3 hours of recording to record a full hour of audio. And we do a thing called punch and roll, whereby as you're recording and you make mistakes, you back up and continue recording over the mistakes so that when you finish, you have a completed finished file. That takes some practice and seems to take some people that changeover from dog clicker or snapping your fingers or whatever. That seems to be one of the hardest obstacles. But we have very specific doors that we use. Studio One, for example, or Reaper are big favourites among the narrators of the world. And it's a slightly different section of the industry in as much as you say, a bit like the video game crowd or the radio commercial crowd, we tend to stick together. We tend to look out for each other and help each other, which is very lovely. And there's a lot of sharing of auditions because our voices are so very specific to us. And this is usually how I start my course. I do a 6-course series of introducing you to the audiobook industry for people who want to get into narration. And it always begins with knowing yourself, understanding where your voice sits amongst all the other voices, how the industry will take you on board, and it pretty much decides where you're going to sit within the industry and what sort of genre you're going to fit into, which often isn't the genre that you enjoy reading. So as a reader, I read fantasy, but as a narrator, I narrate intellectual non-fiction and historical fiction, mostly because of how I sound and mostly because my work is in America. A lot of my work is based in the United States, so this sound is what they relate to those genres, if that makes sense. Hopefully that's a general overview for you.
Now, you mentioned proofers, and I believe there's pre-proofers and editors. Do you want to, for those that don't know, do you want to explain the whole process of doing that? It's not just you reading the book.
It's very much a team effort. So we have all sorts of different people within the process. After I've narrated the book, somebody will proof listen. So not unlike a proof editor for an author, they will listen to the audiobook and ensure I actually said what was on the page. And then I'll get pickups that say, it says, she walked and you said she meandered. Or it's often much more subtle than that. Things like street lamp or street light. Your brain will often transpose words and decide that you want to rewrite the book at some point. And it's very much the audiobook industry is very much filled with people who enjoy spending 6 hours a day in the booth by themselves. It's a very different feeling than walking into a studio for half an hour or chatting with an engineer and getting 3 words out. It's a very solitary life. But the team part of it is that we have proofers that will listen to our work. We then have editors who will worry about spacing and pausing, people who actually master the files and get them ready so that they are suitable for uploading. And we even have people who pre-proof books, so preppers who will read a book for you and let you know all the things you need to know about the book before you've even started. So every so often I'll get a scheduling snafu where I've put far too many books into my month and I just don't have time. I enjoy prepping. I enjoy the process of sitting with a book and discovering the characters, what the author's intention was, the type of writing it is and what the narrative is like. And sometimes if I don't have the time, I will have somebody prep the book for me. And then they'll send me an 8-page printout of a 200-page book that basically says, these are the things you need to watch out for. You need to be aware that the detective has a French accent. Don't forget the mother's Irish, etc., etc. So all the things you would look out for when you were prepping the book, somebody else can do that for you.
It sounds like such a long process. It sounds very, very hard to pull that all together.
It's an interesting one because I do a lot still of corporate work and e-learning, which is very, very quick turnaround. Within 24 hours, I've chatted with the team. They've been online. We've had a session. It's gone. This, by contrast, tends to be a couple of weeks, particularly when you're working with independent authors. You might have a Zoom session with them, discuss why they wrote the book, their feelings about it, how they feel about the characters. You might have, I always give myself a day to prep a book, and then depending on the length of the book, it'll sit with you for a week or 10 days. So it is a much longer process, and I tend to live the characters. I tend to fall very much into the storyline, and it's all I talk about. So for a week and a half, I'll be discussing the difficulties of medicine in Victorian England, or politics in France this year, and in the last century. Whatever it happens to be that I'm narrating is my current topic of interest, and I think that's what drew me to audiobooks, is that my attention is very focused but very temporary. So I love devoting myself, going down rabbit holes about different pronunciations of names or places that things took place, and then I move on to the next thing. But in the time that I'm actually doing that book, it's the most important thing in the world to me. And so being able to spend a week or 10 days on it is a really lovely process. And meeting the authors and being able to, go places to writers' conferences and talk through the process with people. They seem fascinated by how different words are on paper and in your mind than they are when you hear them. Our interpretation of those words often bring a whole new meaning or a whole new feeling to the book, which authors seem really pleased with. So it's a lovely thing to be a part of.
And how many hours per day do you spend in the booth reading?
So when I first started, all I did was narrate. So I would spend when you go to studios, you spend 6.5 hours just narrating. There's breaks in between for a cup of tea and you stop for lunch, but mostly from 9:30 to 5:30 you're sat there narrating, and you'll get through a 12-14 hour book in 3, maybe 4 days. But because you're at a studio where they're paying for the editor and the director and the engineer, and time is money. So when you're at home on your own, it's a different process, and often you have set up the schedule and informed them of the deadline. So it's a joint venture. They've said, can you get files to us by the 22nd? You say yes, so long as you get the script to me by the 12th. And then, the process is undertaken. There's a gap in the middle where you're kind of left to your own devices, and everybody just imagines it's happening and hopes that it's coming out, and usually it is. But as with all things, it's about, good communication. There are, particularly at this time of year, there are so many germs going round, people losing their voices and all sorts of things. And as you can imagine, with an audiobook, consistency is really important. So from chapter 1 through chapter 42, you have to sound like the same narrator. And so if you have a froggy throat, or you've been out the night before and you sound a little rough, you have to learn all the processes that there are to get your voice back into the general base level that you've given the book. And so those sorts of things become quite natural after a while. But I actually now do a lot of coaching and speaking. I travel a lot, so my day is very different. I do admin and online things in the mornings, coaching and so on, and then I narrate in the afternoons. So 2 till 6, 4 hours a day is my narration time. But because I spend most of my time doing all sorts of other things, which again is just about my own personality and my need to be doing lots of different things.
Now, how do you go about, most voiceovers come into the business going, I want to do audiobooks, without really knowing that much about it. How do you go about being cast as an audiobook narrator?
Mostly it's about getting on people's rosters. So some of the big publishing houses have websites that they use where you put up a profile, and they know that they can then choose from there. They have a stable of narrators that they'll get a book, and it'll say, a murder mystery about a 50-year-old woman who knits as a hobby and happens to kill people by night. And they go, I know somebody who knits. Maybe she'd be interested in narrating this. And then they'll reach out to 4 or 5 people, and they'll ask you to audition, and ultimately you do or don't get the book. And it's pretty much the same process all the time. So even independent authors will ask for various different people to audition for the book, and you may or may not get it. And so the process, not unlike with voiceover, is about auditioning. It's about having solid demos that represent who you are as a person, that ensure that your voice is going to be understood and accepted within the industry for who you are and what you offer, which means that then when you come to do the book, it's no issue at all, because that's who you are and it's what you offer. So there's a lovely kind of solidity to it that I really enjoy, an authenticity that says, so long as you know who you are and what you're bringing to the table, when they cast you, you've already done the job. It's just a case of actually sitting down and reading it.
So what advice would you give to somebody who's first starting in the business? What's the best bet for them to get the training they need and to get a full understanding of what to do?
It really depends. I came into this midlife as a non-drama school graduate, which felt like I had a huge chip on my shoulder at the time, sort of 15 years ago. And I spent a lot of time taking acting classes, doing improv, taking coaching, discovering what it was I didn't know. And I think ultimately, you don't know what you don't know. So if you're coming to this as a voiceover, sometimes you'll be under the impression that it is a certain way. And unfortunately, it's the sort of thing that until you're actually doing it, there's no way of knowing. So you do have to give it a go. There's some lovely ways of finding out. There are a lot of books that are in the public domain. So this year, any books that were written in 1929 and before are available for public consumption. And there are websites you can go to where you can look up those books and then choose to record them and release them yourself. And it's a lovely way to work your way slowly through the process and discover how it all works, how you might go about making a cover of a book, what releasing an ebook feels like, how to actually narrate and put together and master all those audio files and then release them as an audiobook. So there are different things you could do depending on the kind of person you are. If you're a doer, if you're a practical person, there are some lovely things you can do to actually get a book out. If you are a learner, if you need educating, for want of a better word, there are some wonderful coaches out there who will teach you all sorts of different things, whether it's about the business of audiobooks or the industry itself or narration itself or character voices or accent work. Understanding what it is you're looking for, what you're missing in your armory, so to speak, is a lovely way to be able to then decide how best to move forward.
Okay, Anna, so this, like every other voiceover genre, you have to have your demos so that you can demonstrate what you can do. Now, you said get onto rosters and contact people. What sort of demos do you need to have to submit to those people to get onto their rosters?
So in contrast to voiceover demos, audiobook demos are genre specific. So each demo will be one single book, one single story with a beginning, a middle and an end, usually 2 to 3 minutes in length. There's some different advice out there about whether they should be 30-second or 5 minutes. I think we need to be aware that people's attention span has lessened over the years. And I think 2 to 3 minutes allows you to get a short story put together that shows off your talents, allows the listener to know what it is they're listening to and whether or not they'd be interested in hearing their words in your voice, which is ultimately what you're after, getting your foot in the door. So important to remember that your demos shouldn't just be the beginning of Pride and Prejudice. They really should be, and I use that as an example because people will often pick a famous book. They'll pick, Moby Dick or Charles Dickens, something very well known. And the issue with doing something very well known is that people have an expectation of what they're going to hear. So picking something obscure, something that actually has a good storyline to it, is a much better call. If your demo is a thriller demo, make sure it's thrilling. Don't feel that you have to pick a piece from a book that's sequential. You can choose, the beginning of chapter 1 and the end of chapter 2 and splice them together and write a sentence or two in the middle that connects them. Create your own demo, which again is the lovely thing about audiobooks compared to other voiceover, that what you're doing is actually showing off your own home equipment. So your demo ought to be produced at home by yourself with your own production values. So don't feel you have to pay thousands of dollars or pounds to have it produced elsewhere. It certainly shouldn't have music behind it. It really is just a single narrative voice. But yes, I could talk about demos for hours. So that's the general idea.
So you should have one for each genre, or one for fiction and one for non-fiction?
The average is sort of 5 or 6 pretty much does it. You'll see people who have 10 or 20. And the issue with 10 or 20 is that as a casting director, when you'll go on a website, you won't know which one to press. And more often than not, people will press the one at the top of the list and then they'll choose one mid-list. and you have no real control over what they're really listening to. So make sure you're focusing in on what you're really good at. It's quality over quantity, perhaps 2 non-fiction and 4 fiction, and make sure you're focusing on genres that your voice belongs in. So make sure you're listening to audiobooks, that you understand what's currently being looked for. Very conversational tone in non-fiction, the very sort of fluid and easy listening style that is currently in place. If you want to get into romance, again, as you said earlier, there are so many different types of romance. Do be careful what you wish for.
And there are all sorts of genres within that as well.
Indeed. So yeah, I think a bit of investigation or some coaching that sort of leads you down those paths and lets you know what the answers might be is always helpful.
That's interesting. Are there lots of pitfalls that people need to watch out for?
I think sometimes there is a place everybody goes to start, which is acx.com. It is the website that is attached to Audible and Amazon. It's a major marketplace for authors basically to say, I've written a book, I'd like somebody to narrate it. And narrators go, oh, there's an audition, and they audition along with 400 other people. Sometimes the author doesn't have the rights to the book. So if they sold their book to a publisher, they may have sold their audio rights as well. And so they can't actually hire you to narrate it. So there's a lot of due diligence to be done, ensuring that you're actually working with the people who can give you a contract and who will actually pay you at the end.
And how would you find that out?
There are ways and ways. So it's a class I give. Very happy to share that information. But there's software you can buy that will actually do the scouting for you and will ensure that the author has the rights to the book. A very simple way is that while you're auditioning on ACX, I always recommend reaching out to the author through their website and saying, just so you know, I've sent through an audition. And once or twice I've had an author come back and go, what audition? At which point you discover that somebody else has put up their book on ACX and they don't have any intention of bringing out an audiobook, and the person who offered it doesn't have the rights to it. So there's kind of this is a very small percentage of the industry, but it's part that people talk about a lot because nobody wants to be scammed. Nobody wants to do 10 days of work and then discover that they're being ghosted by the people who supposedly wanted to hire them. So there are pitfalls to be had, but there's lots of loveliness too.
Yeah, sure.
The other thing that you mentioned is that you do work in your studio, but then you can be called into a studio with a recorder and an engineer. What happens if, for example, you live way down south, that you're asked to record in London? Do they pay for your accommodation and your travel, or do you have to foot the bill yourself?
So one of the reasons I do a lot of work with the United States is because pay in the UK is comparatively low. I work once or twice a year with Penguin Random House in London, and I go up to the studios and they pay a day rate. I won't say it out loud because they'll pay, depending on the book and the narrator, they pay different amounts. But ultimately, it's not enough money. It's not enough to cover your hotel stay, your travel expenses, and it's certainly a lot less than you would have got if you'd stayed home and narrated from your booth. But the quality of books you're narrating with Penguin Random House Studio in London are amazing. So, what an opportunity, what an honour, fantastic, thing to be doing. It's something that's a bit of an issue with regards to how audiobooks are seen in the UK. There's no real standard of expectation, whereas in the US it's union guarded, for want of a better word. So there are union base rates that we can all ask for and that people expect to pay. So the expectation is higher there. But how lovely is it to be able to go into a studio here in the UK and have somebody else press all the buttons for you while you just, you just narrate a book. It's wonderful.
But starting out, it sounds like starting out, it's a bit of a labour of love, but it'll be a while before you're able to earn a living from it. Would that be a fair statement?
That is a fair, yes, absolutely. And in fairness, I was doing a lot more corporate and e-learning work while I was learning to do audiobooks. I cut back on the corporate and e-learning because I love audiobooks so much. And actually, once you become established, there is work to be had. The statistic I love throwing out is that in 2022, through esteemed publishers, or the big five, brought out 500,000 books. If you include independent authors and all the other publishing houses, it's 4 million.
Wow.
Wow.
And when you look at how many books were turned into audiobooks, it was 200,000, which leaves 3.8 million books that aren't in audio. So, there is enough work out there. We just have to go find it. So once you realise where your voice sits, what genres you're interested in, then you can start doing things like networking with particular authors on LinkedIn, reaching out to them. There's software that will allow you to see which authors have books that don't yet have audiobooks. There are lots of different things you can do to kind of manage your way through it and make it better for yourself, which is always lovely.
Just on a voice health note, how long will you tend to read in a day before you think, I really shouldn't go any further?
Personally, I often do it's an 8-hour day at a studio, but you narrate for 6 hours. And I think half the time it's about knowing yourself, understanding how you use your voice. I did a lot of vocal health courses with Yvonne Morley and Nick Redman before I even got into this. So understanding why your voice becomes tired and how best to use it. Even in video games and, the shouting and the grunts and the emotes, all of those things require technical knowledge of your instrument. I was a classical singer before all of this. And so I came in with an awareness of breath control, the importance of using your muscles correctly and so on. And I think it's a very personal thing. Some people will go, a couple of hours and then need to rest for the rest of the day. But ultimately, we all talk all the time. So there's a reason why if you're sitting in a booth reading and you're becoming tired, and yet if you go out with your friends, you could natter over coffee for 3 or 4 hours, that you're doing something different. So it's about recognizing the relaxation required, the positioning, the ergonomics of your booth, etc. All of those things tie into how long you can narrate for.
Wow, so it is a huge subject, as I said at the very beginning. So if there's one thing you could say to a would-be audiobook narrator, what would it be?
You have to love it. As you mentioned, it is a labour of love, but it's worth every moment. My ability and the pleasure I take in delving into and absorbing this, the literature that I get to read, becoming these characters, living these lives. I can't think of a better job. As I said, I do a lot of corporate work. I promote, wines or medical things, or, how to be a kidney donator, and it's a donor, I should say. And I'm aware that it's, in the moment, it's lovely to produce 30 seconds of great audio or a minute and a half of a really interesting video animation. But to finish a 10-hour audiobook about a young woman in Victorian England who wanted to be a doctor and couldn't be because she was female, and the story that ensues and the adventure that she goes on, just living that just thrills me. And I really do think it's a personality thing. I think if you are drawn to that, if you can't help but be an audiobook narrator, once you discover it, most of us say there is nothing else we could do. I think it's very much is a passion, and there are ways of being paid better. So it isn't just people tend to see it as the kind of less well loved cousin of voice work. Even within the industry, within the conferences and so on, audiobooks tends to be pushed to one side. And we don't mind because we're accustomed to being on our own. But we do gather as a group because we so love what we do. And I think it really is just it's a fantastic way to earn a living. I love it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anna, so much. We've actually reached the end of our time now. We could sit and talk to you all day, but sadly it's limited to 30 minutes. So thank you so much. Apologies, we had a couple of technical glitches along the way, which I think we've got around. Yes, wonderful. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you. And if you have enjoyed it, which I'm sure you have because it's been a wonderful half hour, do see the show notes, do leave us a comment, do ask us questions, and promote us, please. And then we can get more of these wonderful podcasts out to you.
Just before we go, Anna, where do people go if they want to come and do some of your training?
So my name is Ana Clements. It's Anna with one N because I'm actually Spanish. So Ana Clements everywhere. So at Ana Clements on Instagram and Facebook and and threads. I'm also anaclements.co.uk online. My website has my email address and so on. So do get in touch, even if it's just a chat. I'm always happy to talk about audiobooks. And I do a weekly free session on Clubhouse. Every Wednesday, we chat for an hour on Narrators Assemble about audiobooks, just for the love of it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking part. And thank you very much at home for listening. Do subscribe, click the button, and we'll see you at the next adventure of Voice Acting Unplugged. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye.